Lesson 8-7, Quadratic Equations, Day 1. Our essential question is how do you factor a quadratic with a coefficient on x squared? By that we mean a coefficient other than the number 1. So something other than 1 in front of x squared kind of complicates our factoring. So under questions you see factoring ax squared plus bx plus c by grouping. We worked with factoring by grouping before, but this is going to be a little bit different. So what we're going to do is identify a, b, and c. So we're going to make sure that our quadratic is written in standard form, and then we're going to identify those three numbers. Then we are going to look for two numbers that have a product of a times c and a sum of b. We have 4 examples in our lesson today. Our first example, factor by grouping 5x squared plus 13x plus 6. I'm going to identify a, b, and c first. A is the number in front of x squared, so a is 5. B is the number in front of x, so b is 13. And c is 6. So we're looking for a product of a times c. A times c, or 5 times 6, is 30. So we're looking for a product of 30. And we're looking for a sum of b, so a sum of 13. So if I list all of the numbers that would have a product of 30, I can start with 1 times 30, move on to 2 times 15, 3 times 10, and 5 times 6. The sum of those, 1 plus 30 is 31. 2 plus 15 is 17. 3 plus 10 is 13. And 5 plus 6 is 11. So you see, we did find a sum of 13 that like we were looking for. So the factors that we need to use are 3 and 10. Now, to factor by grouping, we need 4 terms. 4 terms to factor by grouping. So we are going to take our first term and keep it. So 5x squared. We're going to take our last term and keep it, plus 6. Now, the 2 terms in the middle come from our 3 and 10. Now, I could put them in either order. I could put 3x plus 10x or 10x plus 3x. Now, looking at my first term 5x squared, it would not have any common factors with 3x. So I am going to take the 10x and write that first, then the 3x. Because now if I group my terms together, you'll see that we can take out a common factor. So 5x squared plus 10x, I can divide out 5, because that's the GCF of 5 and 10, and I can take out one of the x's. What would be left inside my parentheses? 5x times x is 5x squared, and then plus 5x times 2 is 10x. Remember, we're just reversing the distributive property here. Now, my other set of parentheses, I know has to match the x plus 2 that was left in parentheses from my first 2 terms. So what is it that's divided out of 3x plus 6 to give me x plus 2? That would be 3. The greatest common factor of 3 and 6 is 3. So think about if you reverse your distributive property. 3 times x is 3x, 3 times 2 is 6. Over here, 5x times x is 5x squared, plus 5x times 2 is 10x. So now I'm ready to write my final answer. So my final answer, I've got my first binomial, x plus 2, that's the one that they share. Then I'm going to move over and take what was factored out for my second binomial. So we factored out 5x plus 3. So those are the 2 binomial factors for 5x squared plus 13x plus 6. Let's try another one. A equals 2 on this example, B equals 3, and C is negative 5. Negative 5. Make sure that you're careful. Be careful with the negative signs. A times C. 2 times negative 5 is negative 10 for our product. And then the sum has to match the middle term, B, so the sum has to be 3. Now, a product of negative 10 could mean negative 1 times 10, negative 10 times 1, negative 2 times 5, or negative 5 times 2. If I add those together, I get a sum of 9, negative 9, 3, and then negative 3. So, negative 2 times 5 would be the one that we need with the sum of 3. Now we're ready to factor by grouping. So, keep your first term, 2x squared. Keep your last term, negative 5. Now, the order for the two terms in the middle, it looks like I've got them in the correct order because this minus 2x would make sense with the 2x squared, and then the plus 5x would go with the 5 because they have common factors. So now I can group these terms together and factor out a 2x, leaving me with x minus 1. Remember, check by distributing. 2x times x is 2x squared, minus 2x times 1 is 2x. So it works. Now, I know that I need an x minus 1 over here to match the first set of parentheses. So factoring out would have to be the number 5. 5 times x is 5x, minus 5 times 1 is 5. So my first binomial, keep my x minus 1, and my second one I factored out, 2x plus 5, so 2x plus 5, just like that. Example 3, on this problem, our value for A is 24, which has quite a few factors. B is negative 22, and C is 3. Our product on this one now, 24 times 3 is 72, and our sum is negative 22. You may need a calculator on this one. Once you find the product that's going to work, you can stop. So if you're adding them as you go, you won't have to make such a big list. Product of 72, and the sum has to be negative, so it would have to be a negative times a negative. So negative 1 times negative 72, if I add them, I get negative 73. Too small. Negative 2 times negative 36 would give me negative 38. Negative 3 times negative 24, negative 27. I'm going in the right direction, you can tell. Negative 4 times negative 18, that's the one that's going to work. So I am not going to write out any more factors. There are still quite a few that I could write for the number 72, but I've found the sum that we need, so I'm done. Okay. Now I can bring down my first term and bring down my last term. Now, the number 3 does not have a common factor with the negative 4, but does with the negative 18. So I need the negative 18x here and the negative 4x over here. Both of them have common factors with the 24, but not with the 3. Okay, now I can group these two together and divide out 4x, which would leave me with 6x minus 1. So check that. 4x times 6x is 24x squared. 4x times 1, or negative 1, negative 4x. Okay, so that means my other factor over here, I need it in the parentheses, 6x minus 1. So now this is a little bit trickier. If you look at this term, it's a negative 18x. So what would I need to multiply my 6x by to turn into a negative 18x? It would have to be a negative 3. Negative 3 times 6x is negative 18x. Negative 3 times negative 1 is positive 3. Okay, so now I've got 6x minus 1 as my first binomial, and then what I took out, 4x minus 3, to make my second binomial. Our last example for today, A is 6, B 22, and C negative 8. So product of AC would be negative 48, and the sum needs to be 22. Okay. Could be negative 1 times 48. That adds up to 47. Negative 2 times 24. That adds up to 22. And we found it already. Okay. Now I can take my first term and keep my first term from the trinomial. So 6x squared. Keep my last term. And I can put them in either order on this problem. Either order. So if I keep them negative 2x and then plus 24x, I can take out a common factor of 2x, and it would leave me with 3x minus 1. Check that. 2x times 3x is 6x squared. 2x times negative 1 is negative 2x. Then I need to match my 3x minus 1. So what has been factored out over here, I think, is 8. 8 times 3x is 24x. 8 times negative 1 is negative 8. Perfect. So my first binomial is 3x minus 1. My second one, 2x plus 8. Okay, so that's our last example for today. You should be able to write a summary and then check the homework calendar or check with your teacher to find out what your homework problems are for the day.